Thank you so much, Tim. Can everyone hear me okay? Just thumbs up. Yes, perfect. Okay, it's so wonderful to see this virtual Beit Midrash fill up. As we begin, I want to say Boker Tov or Tzoraim Tovim or Erev Tov, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. I may be the only good evening sitting here in Jerusalem right now. As they say, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, and Torah shall come forth from Zion. And always good to begin with gratitude. I want to begin, first of all, by singling out the village that really brought this moment together. I want to thank Carolyn Cantor, who has been my partner in crime, working for JTS for just about or over 20 years at this point. And of course, the team in New York, Dorit and Bani, who, when this was suggested to them, they picked up the ball and literally ran with it so quickly to make this happen. Tim and Joan and really everyone at the Jewish Theological Seminary for bringing this virtual Beit Midrash together as we prepare for what will be quite an unusual Seder celebration this coming week, next week. So with that, I want to say, obviously, when we asked the question on Wednesday evening, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot, how is this night different from all other nights? It's going to be quite resonant with everything that we're all experiencing in this truly strange and remarkable and uncertain moment in history with this pandemic that we're all living through right now. This will truly be a Pesach like no other. No other, I want to say, except for the first Pesach that our people experienced in the land of Egypt. And as I started really thinking deeply about this afternoon, of course, I turned back to the book of Exodus. And there in the book of Exodus, we read of the first Passover celebration as the Israelites are about to leave Egypt. And Moses speaks to the people, he calls the elders together. Right? We're in Exodus chapter 12, verse 22. And there it says, "V'lakachtem agudat izov utvaltem badam asher basaf," that you shall take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood of the paschal lamb, and you shall put it on the frame of your door, al shtei mezuzot, min hadam asher basaf, that you shall take from the blood and put it there. And what does the end of that verse say? Ve'atem lo tetzeu ish mi petach beito ad boker. And after you put the blood on the doorpost, it says that a person shall not leave their home until the morning, right? Until the morning. Rashi, the great medieval commentator on this verse, illuminates our understanding and says the following. Megid, this is there to explain that after God gave permission to the destroyer to go out and kill the firstborn of the Egyptians, that destroyer cannot make a distinction between those who are righteous and those who are evil in the world. And here we are confronting another destroyer, right? This destroyer known as the coronavirus. Jews around the world will experience Seder in a very, very different way from ever before, with families on Zoom, phone chats, WhatsApp, and other technologies. I want to say that we, the Jewish Theological Seminary community, extend our thoughts and prayers to everyone afflicted with coronavirus. We extend warm wishes to the entire JTS family, and that is all of you on this call, all of you who are gathered here to learn together over the next hour or so. And we want to remind you that we're going to be moving many of our Kolot study group sessions online after Passover. This is the great experiment, as it were, and you should keep an eye for more information as we move ahead. So this is truly a Shehachianu moment, and what I want to say as we begin this is the first of a three-part series. And the way I've constructed this three-part series is in each session that we have together, I want to take a look at what I'm calling three very cool Haggadot. The Lovell Haggadah, the Mos Haggadah, and finally the Express Haggadah. And what I want to do is I want to take a look in each of these sessions at what is unique about each of these very, very special Haggadot, how they bring us deeply into the Seder experience in very, very different ways, right? And give you some tools that you'll be able to put in your toolbox as you gather around your table for Seder, whether it be on your own, whether it be in Chavruta with your significant other, or whatever configuration you have around the Seder table. I'm hoping that this will give you some inspiration and some food for thought as we move forward. Of course, I also want to acknowledge the presence of the two people that are near and dear to my heart. I see Didi covering her eyes, of course. Didi and Stephen Lovell, who are with us from Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. And Didi and Steve, it's so wonderful to have you here. The Haggadah that I'm going to be talking about today, known as the Lovell Haggadah, and by the way, I had to twist their arms to name this Haggadah after them. I want you all to know that this Haggadah is the product of a gift given to the three of us by the Jewish Theological Seminary. When I began teaching for JTS about 21 years ago, one of our very special development staff, Jackie Gladstein, who many of you will remember, connected me with Didi and Steve Lovell. And I had the privilege of going out to their home, learning Torah with them, learning the philosophy of Abraham Joshua Heschel, and then spending a year completely immersed in what we call the archaeology of the Passover Haggadah. That is, looking at the different layers of the Passover Haggadah. After that year of learning, I vividly remember sitting in Didi and Steve's kitchen in Sands Point, Long Island, and Steve ran to his study to pull out the Haggadah that the family had been using for so many years, and that is Mordechai Kaplan's new Haggadah, which wasn't so new anymore in the year 2001. And just about every copy they had there was held together by electrical tape, wine stains everywhere, as there should be, in a good, well-used Haggadah. And they asked me if I would be willing to take on this project of creating a new family Haggadah. And the reason that Didi and Steve thought about this, and this leads me to how I want to offer a dedication of our learning this evening or this afternoon. They said that they wanted to create a new family Haggadah in memory of the patriarchs of their family. And so tonight here in Jerusalem, I want to dedicate our learning over the next hour to two very special patriarchs, and that is Didi's father, Paul Kalick, and Steve's father, Jack Lovell. What you need to know about these two patriarchs is that Paul's Hebrew name was Pesach, and Jack Lovell, Yaakov ben Moshe Halevi, was born on Pesach. That's Steve's father. He was born on Pesach in 1902. And so because of their very, very special connection to Passover, Didi and Steve had this crazy idea to commission a new family Haggadah. It was meant to be completed in 1 year. 7 years later, we had a copy of this Haggadah in our hands. So they were eminently patient as we jumped into this journey together. None of us knew what it would take to bring this trade edition of the Haggadah to fruition. And there we are. Probably a number of others have this Haggadah in their hands as well. And what I want to do with you is I want to share with you some of the artwork and commentary that we have in this Haggadah. And as we go along, feel free to jot down notes. In fact, I encourage you to jot down notes, either in your own version of the Lovell Haggadah or in whatever Haggadah it is that you're using around your Seder table. And at the halfway point, which is going to be in about 15 minutes, I'm going to pause for some questions that you might have. And then again at 2:15 Eastern time, 15 minutes before we wrap up, I'll pause again and see what questions that you have. So I want to begin with the introduction that I wrote for the Haggadah, in which I talk about 3 different meanings for the word Pesach. Right? We know well, if I were to ask you to define the word Passover, probably, right, 99% of you would say Pesach means Passover, right? And that indeed is one of the 3 meanings of the Hebrew word Pesach. Passover is based on, that particular understanding is based on Rashi's commentary and also the Latin translation of Torah known as the Vulgate. And when we think of the concept of Passover, at its essence, it represents partnership between God and humans. The Israelites have to do something active to participate in their redemption. God is not going to simply bring them out of the land of Egypt, but rather this needs to be a partnership between the Israelites and God. What do the Israelites do? They have to participate in that ritual of slaughtering the Paschal lamb, putting the blood of the Paschal lamb as an apotropaic symbol on their doorposts, so that the destroyer, when the destroyer is unleashed, the destroyer will literally pass over their home. So that's one understanding of this word Pesach. Another understanding that we have of the word Pesach is protection. In fact, the expression in the Hebrew, pasach al, okay, with the preposition, it's to protect something. And we know that from the book of Isaiah, chapter 31, verse 5, which says the following: like the birds that fly, even so will the Lord shield Jerusalem, shielding and saving, protecting and rescuing. God actively protects the homes of the Israelites, right? So the understanding there is that when God passes over the homes, pasach al, God protects. So far we have this understanding of 1, passing over, 2, protection, and then the third meaning of Pesach is that of compassion. This comes from Abraham Ibn Ezra's commentary, approximately 1100 Spain. And there, Ibn Ezra tells us that it's because God had compassion on Israelite males, on firstborn Israelite males, that the sacrifice that's offered on Pesach is called Pesach, meaning compassion, and it's connected to the Akkadian word pasachu, an ancient Near Eastern language closely related to Hebrew, which means to soothe or to placate. Right? So again, these 3 core meanings of Passover: Passover, protection, and compassion. And especially this year, we think of how resonant those particular essences are in our celebration of Pesach. That we hope and pray that this nagif, that this plague of coronavirus will pass over us, that we will be protected from this virus, and perhaps most importantly, compassion, that we are able to show compassion to ourselves, and more importantly, to people in our community, to show compassion to each other. And I would say that perhaps is the most important way that we can prepare for this coming celebration of Passover, especially for elderly in our communities who cannot get out to take care of their Passover needs, that we make an effort to be in touch with them, to check with them, to see what their needs are, to be sure that they have what they need around their Passover table, And of course, to simply be in touch, to put in calls before Pesach, to Zoom, to WhatsApp, to however it is that you can be in touch. That is what is so important as we celebrate Seder this year. So let's jump in first with the idea of journeys. And now what I want to do is I want to turn to a few of the images that we have in the Lovell Haggadah. There are 27 images total, 27 illuminations that appear throughout the Lovell Haggadah. Right, there we have the title of our session, Creativity and Revolution, Part 1, the Lovell Haggadah. And slide 1, plate 1, journeys. Okay, this is what I want you to take a peek at right now. The original piece that I did is actually a paper cut. Okay, let's go back to where we were. Looking at the pit, good. Okay, and this paper cut is very much about journeys. I was trying to figure out how I wanted to open my Passover Haggadah. And the image that you're looking at is inspired by Deuteronomy 26, Parshat Kitavo, literally the Parsha of when you come into the land of Israel. The Hebrew that you see there, means, and you shall take of the first fruits of the ground that you shall bring from the land. That particular Torah reading opens with the tradition of what we call the bringing of the first fruits. It says that when the Israelites come into the land of Israel, they're to take of the first fruits, which are taken from the 7 species of the land of Israel: wheat, barley, dates, pomegranates, figs, etc. They gather them together in the basket that you see, and they place the basket by the altar, present the first fruits to the Kohen, to the priest, and in the moment of making the presentation, they make a declaration. And the Israelite says, my ancestor was a wandering Aramean. He went down to Egypt. Few in number, right? This should sound familiar to all of you. This is the core section of the story that we tell Seder night, the Magid section, right? And right, that is where we begin. That is the core that the rabbis took from the Torah for the storytelling. When we think about what that ritual is about, it's about expressing gratitude. It's about what our own personal first fruits are. And this, I think, is a lovely way to begin Seder, right? To think about what are the blessings that you've received this year? What are you thankful for this year? Right? As we sit down together at the Seder table, again, even if it's just yourself, if you're with one other person, if you're with 3 other people, your core family, right, your nuclear family, whoever it is that you're with, think about the blessings that you have, right? As we live through this challenging time, there's no better way that we could begin the Seder than by thinking about what it is that we can be thankful for over this past year. Let's go to the next slide, plate 3, which is the order of the Seder. And here we have what are called the simanim, the 13 or 14 steps that we have in the Passover Seder. Right? Kadesh, Orchatz, Karpas, Yachatz, the telling of the story, the washing of the hands. Sure, we're going to be doing even more washing of hands as we sit down to Seder this year. Right? The breaking of the matzah, the eating of the bitter herb, etc. As we look on either side of the design, on the right side, the right-hand column, and then again on the left-hand column, we see those simanim, those steps of the Seder represented. Top right-hand corner, Kadesh, sanctifying the day. Right? Then, immediately after that, Orchatz, right? Washing of the hands without a blessing. In the center of the illumination, we have the days of creation, the 7 days of creation, 6 days of creation leading into Shabbat. Part of what I wanted to express in this illumination is that when we gather around the Seder table, it's not simply about the order of ritual that we do with our hands, that we experience with our senses, but it's woven into a deeper existential order. It's woven into the order of God's creation of the world, God's creation of the universe. And certainly at this time, we're thinking deeply of the importance of order in our own lives, of routine in our own lives. I'm sure all of us can't wait to get back to our normal routine, right? We're anticipating what that new normal is going to look like, right? The day after we can come out of our homes, the day when we experience that new morning, as it were, right? That new dawn, right? And certainly we're longing for that normalcy. I want to continue taking a look at page 38. For those of you who have a copy of the Lovell Haggadah in hand, the ritual of orchatz, the first washing of the hands, in which we wash our hands but do not say a blessing. And I want to read to you a poem by Sheila Peltz Weinberg, which appears in the orchatz section, right? That silent washing of the hands that we do. And again, I'm reading this because certainly this year, it's even more important to think about this. It's going to, right, certainly echo with us as we think about what washing means. Sheila Peltz Weinberg writes, "A silent washing, another door to freedom. Hands open to receive the cool water, our bodies awaken. Listen as you begin to relax. Let go of slaveries, habits, hurts, let go. Even of expectations for tonight. Take a quiet moment. What does the water of life feel like on your fingers, palm, on the back of your hand? A silent washing. The blessing is in this silence, in these words, in this moment. Now we draw closer to dip, to taste, to tell, to remember, to rejoice." Right? In particular, I'm thinking about the line in which Sheila Peltz Weinberg writes about the water of life. Right? We say in our tradition, "Uvacharta b'chayim," that you shall choose life. And especially now, "Uvacharta b'chayim," washing of one's hands is about choosing life. It's about affirming life in this moment. Right? Water is so critical to who we are as a people, as humanity today. There's a moment to pause, to reflect more deeply. Yachatz, the breaking of the matzah. On page 40 in Yachatz, I write about how interesting it is that when we break the matzah on Seder night, how fitting it is that the hidden piece is the larger portion of matzah. All too often, right, that's the piece that we're using for the afikomen that we're going to hide to find later. All too often, we fail to see the larger picture. Much of the world is hidden, sometimes by God, sometimes by ourselves, and we must search for the missing piece, like the afikomen. Right? It's all about that which is hidden from our eyes, that which we can't see so clearly. Let's turn to the Magid section on page 47, what it is that we call the 4 questions. Okay, and we can turn to the image that we have of the 4 questions as well. Part of what's so fascinating about the 4 questions is that when you take a look at the original version of the 4 questions, which appears in the Mishnah, the 10th chapter of Tractate Psachim, we see a different version of the 4 questions, and we learn some very, very interesting details about what these questions are about. The original teaching that we have there says the following: Mazgulo kosheni v'chan haben shoelet aviv. We pour the second cup of wine, and here the child should ask. When we read that in the Mishnah, what it's teaching us is that at that point, after you pour the second cup of wine, it should be a moment of utter spontaneity. The child should just jump in and ask questions. That is, whatever questions come to mind. We would think, looking back on it in the context of the Haggadah that we use today, that the Mishnah's intent is that the child should ask the 4 questions. However, we know that's not true because the Mishnah goes on and it says, Ve'im ein dat baven aviv milamdo. But if the child doesn't have enough knowledge or understanding, the parent should teach the child, colon, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halilot. How is this night different, or how different is this night from all their nights? I almost fell into the trap, you see. The correct translation of Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halilot is not, why is this night different from all their nights, but rather, how different is this night from all their nights, exclamation point. The idea that the Mishnah has is it puts those words into the mouth of the parent who says those words to inspire, to encourage the child to ask questions, right? By saying, how different is this night from all their nights? And then saying, on all other nights, we eat either leavened or unleavened bread, right? On this night, only unleavened bread, matzah. On all their nights, we eat a selection of vegetables. On this night, maror. By saying these particular statements, the hope is that the parent will inspire the child to begin asking questions. In the image that you see here, at the top part, shebachol leilot, you have what it is that we do on all their nights, right? We might eat chametz, leavened bread, a variety of vegetables, right? We don't even dip once, and we eat either sitting or reclining, right? But on the night of Passover, what do we do special? The bottom of the illumination, you see red, we eat the twice, and we also recline. At the center of that piece, you see the Passover lamb. And the reason have a that is all other nights we roasted boiled or cooked meat, but on this night we only obviously on the wayside, since that has gone by the wayside, right? We don't ask that question, and we substitute it for another question. I understand that some of you are having difficulty hearing me. Tim?
Yep.
Yep. Do you want to try pausing your video for a little bit?
Sure. Okay. Is that better?
Yes, for me.
Okay, great. So let's stick with that for a moment. This is actually a very, very good time to pause and see if there are any questions out there. I promised you at the midway point we'd pause and take some questions.
Yes, your explanation of the Manishtana, the last little bit did not come across because of communications problem.
Okay, so
About the top and bottom of the page of the picture.
okay, great. So let me just review that quickly. Right, if you take a look at the illumination itself, you see the top of the illumination is what it is that we do on all other nights. The bottom of the illumination is what it is that we do special on Seder night. Right, the top of the illumination, right, eating chametz or matzah, leavened or unleavened bread, a variety of vegetables. We don't dip even once. We might eat either sitting or reclining. And the bottom, what do we do special for Seder night? Matzah, bitter herb, we dip twice, and everyone is reclining Seder night. Also, I mentioned that at the core of this illumination is the Paschal Lamb. And the reason I did that is because in the original version of the 4 questions, it has a question or statement about the Paschal Lamb that we don't have in our version of the 4 questions today. And the original version said, on all other nights we eat roasted, boiled, or cooked meat, but on this night we eat only roasted meat. The Mishnah preserved that because it wanted to preserve the memory of the Paschal Lamb, which was offered when the temple stood, when both temples stood. Once the second temple is destroyed, that puts an end to the offering of korbanot, of sacrifices, an end to the Passover ritual, how it was described in Torah. And that is what gives impetus to the rabbis to be much more creative and develop the Seder ritual that we observe today. Other questions? 1 or 2 other questions?
A reminder that if you want to unmute yourself, then you press the microphone in the bottom left. If you're on the phone only, you can key in *6 to unmute yourself.
Okay, if not, then we are ready to move on. By the way, when you come to the 4 questions, I think one of the great exercises that you can do at this point is ask, if there were a 5th question that you could ask, what would that 5th question be? Right? What would you add to those 4 questions? What would be, right, one of those burning questions that you'd like to ask? Or what would be your own version of the 4 questions? Right? I want to underscore that the quality of a Seder is in direct proportion to the amount of homework that you do. So do not expect to open the Haggadah Seder night, only Seder night, and create an engaging Seder. Right? A Seder needs and requires a lot of homework in advance. And I want to encourage you, this is the time to do it. This is the time to sit down, look at the variety of Haggadot that you have sitting on your Jewish bookshelf, pull them off your shelf and do some homework before Seder night. That is going to infinitely enrich the quality of the Seder that you celebrate together. Let's turn to plate 6, Avadim Hayinu, one of my favorites in the Haggadah. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. So as I was creating this illumination, I happened upon a very, very beautiful midrash, which I calligraph in the bottom portion of this illumination. This is connected explicitly to Avadim Hayinu, which we sing around the table. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. And the teaching that I found, the midrash, teaches the following. It explains that the reason that we recite Avadim Hayinu every year is to atone for the sin of selling our brother Joseph into slavery. And God decreed that by virtue of reminding ourselves that we too were slaves in Egypt, we are atoning for that sin of casting our brother Joseph into a pit, which ultimately is what brings the entire Israelite people down to the land of Egypt. So what do you see there in the iconography? You see the upside down pyramid, right? This is a piece that if you had it in hand, I would encourage you to flip it over, right? You see the pyramid, and draped on the pyramid is the Ketonat Pasim, the Technicolor Dreamcoat of Joseph. If you look even more closely around the pyramid, you see a design that represents the shackles of slavery. Those shackles of slavery around the pyramid then become the roots of a tree of life growing in front of Mount Sinai. The piece flips, there you have Mount Sinai, and a quote from the book of Leviticus, Ki li v'nei Yisrael avadim avadayim asher hotzeti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim. The children of Israel belong to me, they are my servants, I took them out of the land of Egypt. Right? So on one side of this illumination, the Israelites are enslaved. in Egypt. On the other, they're free. They're free at Sinai, right? So quite interestingly, we have this transition from being servants of Pharaoh on one side to becoming servants of God. It's not that we simply are free, right, with no bounds or boundaries, but rather we're free within the context of Torah, right? It's through the observance of Torah, and through recognizing, right, our true ruler, that is God, that is how we become free. I want to turn now to page 57 in the Haggadah, and that is the story of the rabbi seated in Bnei Brak. We have this beautiful story of rabbis Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon, who were reclining around the Passover table in Bnei Brak. Right, I also want to say, as I read this passage, right, I can't help but think about Bnei Brak, which has become the epicenter of the coronavirus in Israel today, right? For Israel, this is the New York of Israel right now. And we're all praying, especially for those living in Bnei Brak. And there, these rabbis they were telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt the entire night until the students came and said to them, our teachers, the time for the recitation of the morning Shema has arrived. What is this passage teaching us? It's telling us, first of all, that the rabbis were telling the story of the Exodus all night. Right? They delved into the story, into every detail of the story so deeply that they were doing it until the time of the morning Shema. There are some who believe that when the students come in to notify the rabbis that the time of the morning Shema has arrived, that this is actually code language for the beginning of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which took place in 137 CE. That was the last stand of the Jews against the Roman conquerors. And it's with that we lose sovereignty in the land of Israel until the year 1948, right? Quite remarkable. So what I always love to point out in this section is that it's not only about the learning that goes on around this table, but it's also about action and how learning leads to action. In the illumination that you see in front of you now, right, this is all iconography connected to the morning Shema that's referenced here in this passage. Scrolled around the entire piece, you have the Mishnah that asks the question, from what time may we recite the morning Shema? And then the iconography that you see at the center of this illumination, first of all, Arba Amot, or 4 arms lengths, right? One of the definitions that the rabbis give in the Talmud of when you can begin the recitation of the morning Shema is when you can see your fellow human being a distance of 4 arms lengths from you, right? Also reminds us of social distancing right now. Tchelet, right? That in the tzitzit, right, we're told to weave a blue thread in the fringes of the ritual garment. That blue is taken from a snail that's found on Israel's northern coast. The bands of color that you see there are the shades of color that the rabbis suggest resemble the tchelet that Torah is talking about. And they say, ultimately, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner of the illumination, the tchelet resembles the waters of the sea, which resembles the lower firmament, the upper firmament, and then the strip of gold that you see there, which is God's throne of glory. On the right side, obviously, right, you see the knots of the tzitziot of the ritual fringes, right, dancing in these psychedelic colors. Right, there you have Bnei Brak. Let's turn to the 4 children as they're represented in the Haggadah. On page 60, if you're following in the Haggadah, right, we're told of right? The four children, the wise, the wayward, the simple, and the one who does not know how to ask. And at the top of the four children section, you'll see that I entitled this diversity. And I have a quote from Ben Azai. Ben Azai said, "Scorn no one and do not disdain anything, for there is no human who does not have his hour, and there is no thing that does not have its place." A quote from Pirkei Avot. Truly, all four of these children have their place around the Seder table. So let's take a look at the image, Tim. The illumination of the four children. What I did in this illumination is I chose a biblical character to represent each of the four children. The wise child is represented by the prophetess Deborah. The wicked child is represented by King Achav from the book of Kings and his evil wife Jezebel. Lot represents the simple child, and Adam and Eve are the ones who don't know how to ask. One of the most intriguing figures that we have here is Lot, the nephew of Abraham. And just as a way of animating this particular piece, the reason I chose Lot as the simple child here is because in an episode that we have in the book of Genesis in Bereshit, Lot and Abraham are having a conflict between themselves. Abraham and his nephew, their herdsmen are fighting with each other. Abraham magnanimously says to his nephew, Lot, you choose your piece of land and I will head in the opposite direction. What does Lot do? Vayisa Lot et einav vayar et kol kikar hayarden. He lifts up his eyes and he looks out into the Jordan Valley. Which part of the land of Israel was Lot looking toward? He was looking toward Sodom and Gomorrah. And Torah describes Sodom and Gomorrah in those days as being like a well-watered garden in Egypt. Right? The point is that Lot simply judges with his eyes. He doesn't think more deeply about the kind of community that he's going to. Right? That's why I call him the simple child. He doesn't think more deeply about where he's headed, but rather just simply judges based on surface appearance. Right? I wanted this to have some connection to us and how it is that we might think of ourselves as being simple sometimes. I think the most powerful explanation, interpretation that we have of the four children is we are not categorically one of these children, right? We cannot simply call ourselves the wise child or the wicked child or the simple or the one who doesn't know how to ask. We each contain parts of these children within us. And it depends on where we are in our own lives, right? It also depends on where we are in a particular moment of history, but we take on these different persona at different times in our lives, right? It's also a very, very important lesson in recognizing that we have diversity sitting around the Seder table, right? That we have these different types that we're surrounded by, and we've got to be able to tailor the Seder to these different types. You don't only tailor a Seder to the Chacham, to the wise child, but it also has to be tailored to the wayward and the one who doesn't know how to ask, right? We've got to be attentive to all of the needs that are seated around our table. Let's take a look at plate 11, the Hisheamda, and she stood by us. Right? We always love singing this song around our Seder table. She stood by us. What does this mean? Every commentary you read on this, the rabbis were wrestling with this notion of who or what is she that stands by us in every generation. And so what they did in their wrestling is they looked for a feminine noun in the Hebrew. She could be Torah. Torah stands by us in every generation. She could be God's promise, as in the word haftacha, another feminine noun that we have, right? Or it can be interpreted as God's feminine presence standing by us from one generation to the next. Again, in the original piece, this is a paper cut. And what I did in the four corners of this illumination is you have three very difficult biblical episodes that our people went through. The top left-hand corner, you have Jacob in the house of Lavan with Rachel and Leah. The top right-hand corner, you have Amalek, who is the quintessential enemy of the Israelite people, of the Jewish people throughout every generation. The bottom left-hand corner, King Ahasuerus, standing with Esther, gazing at the noose of Haman. And then finally, in the lower right-hand corner, you have survivors of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, peering over the barbed wire. And in Hebrew, which is somewhat difficult to see here, if you were to enlarge the image, you could see it. There's gold Hebrew text there. Thank you, Tim. Amazing, right? And you see Hatikva in the bottom right-hand corner, the hope, right? The survivors peering over the barbed wire, reaching for the hope. The entire image that you see in the center is in the shape of an egg. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to communicate fragility. We can't take this promise of God in every generation for granted. It's something that we have to cradle very, very carefully in our hands and in our soul from one generation to the next. And certainly this year, we recognize the fragility of life, the fragility of God's promise. Okay, let's, perfect, thank you. I want to go to the core of the storytelling, and that is Deuteronomy 26, the Maggid section. This is on page 78, if you have your copy of the Haggadah. This is the section that I referenced when I was discussing the first illumination. My ancestor was a wandering Aramean. He went down to Egypt and sojourned there, few in number. When the rabbis talk about fulfilling the obligation of telling the story of Passover, this is the core paragraph that you have to recite. Essentially nothing else, right? This is the piece that is so crucial to our telling of the story, Seder night. But as we read this, one of the questions that we ask ourselves is, does this get to the essence of the story of the Exodus from Egypt? And for many of us, it leaves us wanting. It leaves us thirsty. And so I would encourage you at this point to think of, how would you tell the story? What is the essence of this Exodus from Egypt? Where would you begin telling the story? Would you begin with Abraham, as this summary begins in Deuteronomy 26, or would you begin elsewhere? I would encourage you to think about that deeply, because I think if I were pushed on this topic, I would want to begin with the story of Joseph, not necessarily with the story of Abraham, right? And the reason I say that, right, is because in so many ways, where is it that our enslavement begins? Our enslavement begins with a Technicolor Dreamcoat. It's all because of parental favoritism that enslavement begins. Right? A lesson to all of us out there, not to show favoritism to anyone, not our children, not to anyone else, right? Ultimately, it leads us into places that we don't want to be, places that we don't want to go. Let's turn to the next illumination, plate 13, the subtle descent. Right? Oftentimes, most often, when we think about maror, when we think about the bitter herb, what immediately comes to mind, especially for those living in the Northeast, is Gold's horseradish, right? Chrein. That's what we think of when we think of the bitter herb. And yet, when we look at the menu of possibilities that the rabbis give us for the bitter herb, the herb that is considered to be the most ideal for the bitter herb is not horseradish root, right, which is quite dramatically sharp to the palate, but rather it's romaine lettuce. And why do they say that romaine lettuce is the ideal specimen to use for the bitter herb? The reason they say that is because there is subtlety to the bitterness of romaine lettuce. When you first chew romaine lettuce, it's sweet to the palate. The longer you chew it, the more bitter it becomes. It's meant to resemble the descent of the Israelites into slavery. The illumination you see here begins with Joseph and his brothers, right? We look into the outline of the romaine lettuce. There you see Joseph and his brothers, and then slowly we transition into enslavement. We have Vayaka melech hadash asher lo yadat Yosef, a new king arises that doesn't know Joseph. Right? And then the enslavement slowly begins, the building of the store cities, Pitom and Ramses. Then the decree against firstborn Israelites that they need to be cast into the Nile. And then towards the bottom, into the stem of the leaf, we have the enslavement. The idea is that slavery happened so gradually, the Israelites themselves didn't even notice it. We often think that slavery just happened suddenly, right? In one moment they become enslaved, but rather it's a subtle descent into enslavement. And when we eat the bitter herb, when we eat the romaine lettuce, it's meant to remind us of that subtlety. It doesn't happen dramatically. I always shudder when I think about how much this resembles the experience of the Jews of Germany just prior to the Holocaust. Right? A fabulous book that I highly recommend is Amos Elon's The Pity of It All, which is the history of German Jewry. Right? This is a moment that would make our Chancellor Emeritus Ismar Schorsch very proud. Right? The history of German Jewry up until the Holocaust. And if you really want to get an insight into how it is that German Jews were completely blindsided, right, by the tragedy of the Holocaust, this is the book to read. Again, it's about subtlety. It happens so slowly, right, that you barely see the fingerprints on the wall. Right, very, very important to think of as we sit down to reflect Seder night. Plate 14. This is the third paper cut that is in the portfolio of 27 images, Vanitzak el Adonai Eloheinu, that we cried out to the Lord our God. What I did here is I repeated the expression of crying out, that we cried out, we cried out, we cried out. And this particular expression appears in the declaration that the Israelite makes when the first fruits are presented. You remember where it is that we began? Right, with the first paper cut, gathering the 7 species of the land of Israel into a basket, and the Israelite saying, my ancestor was a wandering Aramean, went down to Egypt few in number, and at one point during that little summary of history, the Israelite says, we cried out to the Lord our God. So what you see here in the paper cut is repeatedly Vanitzak, Vanitzak, we cried out, which is also an expression of prayer. And every time you see it, it's stylistically unique. Look toward the bottom of the paper cut. Each time you see Vanitzak, it's always unique in how it presents itself. And slowly that rises heavenward. And then you see large Hebrew words in the cutout. This is taken from a quote at the very end of the 2nd chapter of the book of Exodus. Vayishma, God heard their cry. Vayizkor, God remembered the covenant. Vayar, God saw their affliction. Vayeda, God knew. And that is when redemption begins. Something that's so striking about the traditional Haggadah is that there's one very important character that is almost entirely missing from the Haggadah. Who is that? It's the character of Moses. And why is Moses missing? Right? We have one mention of Moses. When you're looking at the Haggadah this year, scour the Haggadah for a mention of Moses. You will find it, I assure you. I'm not going to give away the answer to that. You'll write to me after Pesach and let me know where it is. The rabbis did that by design, because what did they want to do in the traditional Haggadah? They wanted to underscore that the exodus from Egypt was a miracle, and it was entirely the work of God. But in doing that, what did they do? They diminished the role of the Israelites themselves. They diminished the role of human beings. They diminished the idea of partnership in all of this. And it's M.L. Fackenheim who was a great scholar of Jewish thought. And Emil Fackenheim teaches that it's the response from below that calls forth a response from above, which is to say that it's not only God that brought about this miracle of redemption, but it's because the Israelites cried out to God. The Israelites took the first step, right? What am I saying in all of this? That, we need to demonstrate action, right? We need to often take the first step before God sends out the divine helping hand, right? And one of the silver linings to the cloud that we're seeing in this pandemic that we're living through, right? I'm sure you're all watching the race, right, for a vaccine against the coronavirus, right? A race for a remedy, right? A race for, right, the medication, right, that will defeat, right, this plague that's out there. And I believe that says so much about what it is to take the first step. I think when you get to this point of the Seder, it's also worth thinking about Zionism as well and the creation of the birth of Israel. One of the great debates, in fact, a debate that I'm talking about with my rabbinical students who came to study in Israel this year, is how it is that Zionism is a revolution against traditional Judaism. What do I mean by that? What Zionism said to the Jewish people is you have to be proactive. You have to take your destiny into your own hands. You can't simply wait on the sidelines for redemption, but you have to be the Nachshon. You have to be the one that makes that move to jump into the Red Sea, to cross. You've got to embrace redemption. So it could be a great moment to talk about a favorite Zionist thinker that you have, right? Whether it be Theodor Herzl or Ha'am or Golda Meir. Bring one of those great Zionists to the table as you talk about what it is to take the first step. Let's head toward the next illumination, Makot, the plagues. And as we turn to the plagues, what I did very quickly in this illumination of the plagues is I illustrated the 10 plagues. Each plague is represented by 5 bands of color. The red that you see on the right, Dam, right? And then Sfardea, Kinim, Arov. So if you show the other folio page, you'll see that as well. Here we are. Okay, starting on the left side, Dam, Sfardea, Kinim, Arov, Dever, blood, frogs, right? And then lice, etc., going through all of the plagues. And the stippling, the little dots that you see, are meant to remind us of the wine that you diminish from the cup. Why do we diminish from the cup? Because our redemption came through the suffering of others. I think this year, the plagues, the Makot, are a perfect time to bring the following prayer to our table. Tim, can you pull up that pandemic prayer? This is a prayer, by the way, that was just recently shared with me by one of my students from Jacksonville, Florida, Etta Fialco, who received it from a very dear friend of hers from Detroit, Michigan. You've got that, Tim? Yeah, okay, great. The author of this prayer, his name is Roger Lemus. And in a moment, you'll all see it in front of you. If you can't pull it up, Tim, I'll ask if you could just read it to us. There we are. Great. We just had it, and now it's gone. Okay, so listen to this prayer. Okay, again, Roger Lemus of Detroit, Michigan. He writes the following introduction: surely prayer is a fitting response to what we are facing. It traditionally has been appropriate to seek help the face of great danger by prayers of supplication. And here's what Roger wrote. O God, we turn to you at this time of peril, seeking your protection for us, our families, and all humanity. We ask that you heal in body and spirit all those in this country and throughout the world stricken by this terrible new plague. We ask that you strengthen and protect the nurses, doctors, and all others who are placing their own lives at risk to care for the sick. We pray for our leaders and their advisors at all levels of government and for all others who exercise just and rightful authority, asking that you give them insight, judgment, and compassion as they make the many decisions facing our country that need to be made now and in the future. We pray too that you will guide and grant wisdom to all who are tirelessly working to develop new medicines and vaccines to cure and protect against this virus, and ask for their success so that soon it may be defeated and this pandemic ended. And finally, we ask that you sustain and help all who, even though escaping illness, are finding their lives and the lives of their families in turmoil because of the consequences to our society of the disease. As we seek your assistance, support, and mercy, we say, Amen. Right? How beautiful is that? I see that we're at the 2:15 marker or the 9:15 marker here in Israel. So I want to pause and see what questions you have before we move on.
This is Saul. Can you share that prayer with us? Can you email it around to everyone? I think that is beautiful, and we'd love to use it on Shabbat down here.
We're happy to do that. And I want to ask, there are actually a number of pieces that we would like to send out to all of you on this call. If you could please, you'll see that there's a chat box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you click on that chat box to everyone, if you type your email in, that would be great, and we'll be able to send that out to you, as well as some of the other pieces that I think will really enrich your Seder. There's also a document that I put together called Creative Ideas to Enrich Your Seder that I am happy to share with all of you, as well as a suggested outline for using the Lovell Haggadah this year that we're happy to send to all of you. So please do that, and Dorit and Joan will take note of all of these emails so that we're able to send them out to you. Other questions that you have?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. Joel?
So first of all, thank you so much. This is very beautiful, and certainly the Haggadah is very beautiful and one that I want to explore more. I was interested in, and this is something I'm guessing you must have given some thought to. You put this together. It seems to me that there are so many versions of the Haggadah written by so many different people with so many different agendas. And there are different depictions of pictures of what the wise son looks like, or the wicked son. In some cases, the son is strong, in other cases, not. Is there anything else in Judaism where there is such variability, and why is that with Pesach and the Haggadah?
So great question, Joel. What I want to say is the most illuminated text that we have in Jewish tradition is the Passover Haggadah, right? And it has indeed given rise to this incredibly rich artistry. And I believe one of the reasons that we see that is because in every generation, b'chol dor vador, right? In every generation, the Haggadah is interpreted within the context in which we're living, right? And so every generation of Jews brings new concerns and new interpretations. Hafochba v'hafochba dukulabe, right? Turn it over and over, for everything is in it. And I believe it's simply because the Haggadah, number one, is the core story that we tell. It's one of the reasons that I understand that 99% of Israelis, of Israeli Jews, sit around the table and observe Pesach. And the reason is because that's it. We are telling the story of our people. And I believe that because it's core to the story that we tell, that I believe is the reason that it lends itself to such intense homiletical interpretation, as well as visual interpretation as well. Like you're pointing out, there's such a rich spectrum of illuminations that we have, and certainly you're going to see that in our next session when we take a look at David Moss's Haggadah and some of the richness of the different layers of his piece as well. But I delight in that diversity, and I could tell you that, you know, as an artist, part of what I did, part of the reason that this ended up taking as long as it did, took 4.5 years to complete the artwork of this Haggadah. And part of the reason is that it wasn't simply an artistic exercise for me, right? It was a deeply rabbinic exercise, a deeply Jewish exercise, in that I sat with mountains of Haggadot before me. I was literally on the shoulders of giants, you know, and for that, I really have the JTS Rare Book Room to thank. Because as I began doing this research, it was Jerry Schwartzbard in the Rare Book Room of the Jewish Theological Seminary that very, very graciously pulled out piles and piles of some of the most exquisite Haggadot. And, you know, there I was, you know, cradling these masterpieces in my hand and thinking about, you know, what is going to be the new interpretation that I bring? What is going to be the fresh interpretation? You know, so for instance, you know, with the 4 children, Rabbi David Galinkin of the Schechter Institute points out that I'm the first to illuminate them in terms of biblical characters. He believes that has never been done before, right? And, you know, so for me, that was the chidush, that was the innovation that, you know, I was bringing in that particular interpretation. But I'm sure that all of you here in this virtual Beit Midrash, you would choose 4 different characters, you know, that you would represent. You know, so everyone's got some, you know, a gift that you could bring to the table for, you know, every different one of these steps of the Seder, every different one of these 14 steps of Seder. Thank you, Joel. Another question out there. So wonderful to see so many familiar faces, so many people that I love, and so many panim chadashot, so many new faces as well. I wish, I want to say I wish I could hug all of you, but I know that even if I were there in person, I wouldn't be able to hug anyone. So it's great to see you virtually. Shall we go a bit more, the last 5 minutes or so that we have? Let me take you to plate 21 of the Lovell Haggadah, and that is the image of Miriam dancing. Teaching of Rabban. There we are, Miriam the prophetess. Perfect. Right, what I did in this illumination is I was playing off of the idea of Lamed Vavnikim, the 36 righteous people that sustain the world. Right, the rabbis tell us that in every generation there are 36 anonymous people out there, and God makes a daily decision to keep the world going because of the chesed, because of the loving kindness of these 36 people. What I did here is I took the image of Miriam dancing with her timbrel, and she's surrounded by 36 women, right? So I made them Lamed Vav Nikol. right? What about at this point of the Seder, right? As you sing Hallelujah and you think of Miriam dancing, think of who those righteous people in the world would be for you. Who are those righteous people in your life that have meant so much to you, that have shown you so much chesed, that have shown you so much loving kindness in your lives, and especially at this time. The next image that you see, sort of racing through these last three selections, the breath of all life. Nishmat kol chai tevarech et shemcha. Literally, right, today, every soul of life, every breath of life, not only nishama, but also nishima, right? Breathing, every breath of life will bless your name. And this is based on a famous medieval poem that we have that appears in all of our festival celebrations. Ilu finu male shara kayam. If only our mouths were as full as the waters of the sea, or our tongues as the waves of the ocean. Right? You see those waters of the sea towards the top, the waves of the ocean, or our legs as graceful as those of gazelles, right, in the bottom portion. Even then, we still couldn't declare sufficient praise to you, God. Lashana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in a rebuilt Jerusalem. The next plate. We see an elderly man planting a carob tree. This is based on the story of Choni HaMe'agel, right? Based on the story of Choni the circle drawer, who sees an elderly man planting a carob tree and critiques that person, says, "What are you planting the sapling for? You'll never live to eat of its fruits." And the response of the elderly man is that others planted for me, and now I plant for future generations. When I thought about what is the meaning of next year in Jerusalem, it's not only about a physical rebuilding of Jerusalem, which, thank God, I am surrounded by every single day living in this magnificent city, but it's also about how it is that we plant for future generations, how it is that we make an investment in future generations. And the final image of my Haggadah that you have that I wanted to share with you this afternoon, this evening, is that of Hatikvah, the Israeli national anthem. I wanted my Haggadah to end with the singing of the Israeli national anthem. And what I did in this illumination is I based the frame on a classical ketubah from Ferrara, Italy, 1871. I was very, very taken by the floral design of the ketubah, and it was in the personal ketubah collection of Dick Levy, Richard Levy, Zichrono Livracha, of Boca Raton, Florida. And I love the notion of taking a ketubah frame and placing the words of the Israeli national anthem into that ketubah frame. Right? We know well that the Israeli anthem, Hatikvah, literally means the hope. And one of the things that we say is Od lo avda tikvatenu, Hatikvah bachnot alpayim. We have not lost our hope, the hope of 2,000 years to be a free people in our land, the land of Zion and the land of Jerusalem. And it's with that sense of hope that all of us this year need to approach our Seder experience. It's reminding us of the many hopes that have come true, especially that hope of Eretz Israel, of Medinat Israel, of the land of Israel, the state of Israel, that we celebrate as a Jewish community throughout the world. That hope we celebrate, and please God, the hope to come that we will celebrate, that very soon, bimhira v'yameinu, very quickly in our days, we will have a cure for this coronavirus, that we will see the healing of anyone and everyone suffering from corona, that we as a community will be able to go out once again, dancing in the streets, celebrating normalcy, as it will. We're celebrating our daily routine, celebrating who we are as a people, who we are as a humanity. And that is my great blessing as we close this afternoon session, that we're able to not lose sight of that sense of hope in our lives. And as difficult as it is to be quarantined in our own homes, to remember that it's with this tikvah that we go forward. This is our strength as a Jewish people, and this is what we have to share with those who we're quarantined with, and our extended families and our communities as well. Again, thank you so much to the Jewish Theological Seminary for bringing us together, giving us this moment of nishama, of soulful searching into the Haggadah, and also nishima, giving us a breath of community, of being in a Beit Midrash together. Thank you so much, Tim, for dealing with all the technicalities of this, sitting in New York. It's so great to have you as a partner. Thank you to the Department of Institutional Advancement at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And most importantly, thank you to all of you who are so invested in the sacred work of JTS. We cannot thank all of you enough. And we ask you to stay at home, stay healthy, and stay safe. Chag Kasher v'Sameach, and I look forward to part 2, which will be Monday afternoon. That is Monday, April 6th. Correct, Tim?
Okay. Matt, thank
Correct,
you
1:15.
so much. This was so beautiful. It was like listening to an exquisite song, the way you spoke about all the different pages. I want to thank the Lovell family. I see their beautiful faces. You see, I have the book. And it was so nice going through it with you. And Howard had to help me find, so I can get off my mind, so I'm able to speak with you. What I loved and I thought was so interesting when you were saying the rabbis look to God, for our leaving and taking care. And the way you said, but it has to be the people that helped to make the difference, that helped to bring about the beautiful Judaism that we have today, and to be able to celebrate the beautiful holiday of the Passover. And just to always remember what an incredible people we are. And it's a blessing. And you're a blessing, Matt.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you for those very sweet thoughts. And I'm also looking at my screen, seeing that I was remiss, because not only do we have Didi and Steve, but we've got 3 of the Lovell children on with us, Wendy, Barry, and Hope. It's so great to see you. And not only them, but also a Lovell granddaughter, Maya, from Minneapolis, who's on with us as well. It's so wonderful to see you. So thank you for joining in.
Okay, so Chag Sameach in advance, and thanks for everything.
Chag Sameach. And again, please be sure to send your email address in. And like I said, next Monday, we're going to continue with the Moss Haggadah, delving into some of the exquisite imagery of David Moss's Haggadah. David was a mentor in my own artistic journey, and he's one of my partners in a very special project here in Jerusalem called Kol Ha'ot.
Beautiful.
Creating Jewish life through art. And I also want to tell you, by the way, that on David's website, which is, I will think, Beit Alpha Editions, which you can search easily in Google, there is a Passover offering this year to download, totally free, open to everyone. He created something called the Siman Tov Seder, and this is something that you could print easily at home, and you create these little booklets for each of the steps of Seder. So I encourage you to take a look at that, and we can also email that information to you as well.
And what time on the 6th, Matt? What time?
It's going to be at 1:15 Eastern time, 8:15 Israel time.
Oh, they gave the wrong time, and that's why it was there so late. It said 2:15, so maybe I read it wrong. So
okay, so yeah, so 1:15 Eastern time, and I'm sure we'll send out a reminder to you probably the Sunday before.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Thank you all again.
Okay,
Stay safe, be healthy.
bye-bye. So long.